The small desert town had always been quiet, almost sleepy. Days passed slowly there, and people liked it that way. Life was simple early mornings, long afternoons, and peaceful nights where even the sound of a passing truck felt like an event. So when the sky lit up one evening with a strange silver streak, nobody knew what to make of it. At first, people thought it might just be a meteor. Things like that sometimes happened, and usually they were over in seconds, just a quick flash that left people staring up and pointing. But this time, the streak didn't fade. It grew brighter, louder, almost like it was pushing against the air itself. Then came a deep, distant sound that made window frames shake and dogs start barking in confusion. Families stepped out of their homes. Some came with phones in their hands, recording the sky. Some covered their ears. Some simply stood frozen, watching the streak fall lower and lower. It wasn't falling at the speed of a meteor anymore. It looked controlled, almost steady, like something trying to land. The town didn't have any tall buildings or busy roads. Just small houses, a gas station, a diner, a school, and a long stretch of road leading out toward the empty desert. The streak finally touched down far beyond the last row of houses, kicking up clouds of dust that rose like storm clouds. People gasped. A few shouted. Someone yelled that it might be a plane crash, and someone else said it didn't look like any plane they'd ever seen. The dust kept rising, slowly spreading over the desert floor until parts of the horizon couldn't even be seen. While most people stayed together, one man stood silently near the edge of the crowd. He didn't speak. He didn't hold a phone. He just watched the desert like he was trying to understand something deeper than what his eyes were seeing. He had lived in that town for several years, keeping mostly to himself. Some people called him quiet, some called him strange, and some said he had the steady calm of someone who had seen too much in life. Nobody knew his whole story, but everyone knew one thing: he rarely got scared. As the dust began to settle, the shape of something unfamiliar appeared in the distance. It wasn't metal like a plane, and not shaped like any machine anyone recognized. It looked smooth, curved, almost like a large shell split open in the middle. Light pulsed from inside it with a strange blue glow, faint but steady. A group of people started walking back toward town, saying they didn't want to stick around. Others watched from the safety of the road, but didn't dare go closer. And then someone screamed. A tall figure stepped out from the glowing shell. The crowd reacted instantly. Some ran, some cried, some tried to pull others away. The figure was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Tall, graceful, almost glowing under the fading evening light. Her skin looked pale, almost shimmering, and her eyes had an intensity that made people feel both scared and unable to look away. Her clothing, or whatever covered her, flowed like it was made of some fabric far more advanced than anything on Earth. People didn't stay long enough to study her. They turned and fled, running toward their homes, their cars, anywhere but the desert. Someone shouted, "It's a monster!" And someone else yelled, "Don't look at her." Panic spread so fast that even people who didn't see her yet started running. The whole town buzzed with fear within minutes. Kids cried. Adults breathed heavily, trying to explain what they saw. Some said she had glowing eyes. Others said she was floating. Some swore she moved like a queen walking among insects. Someone called her a vampire alien because of her pale appearance and the strange aura of energy around her. The nickname stuck immediately, and once a word like that spreads, it becomes hard to erase. Everyone locked doors. Lights went off. People shut curtains and whispered through cracks, trying to understand what had landed outside their town. Everyone except the quiet man. He remained standing on the same stretch of road, watching the desert long after the others had run. He didn't feel frozen. He felt drawn in a way He couldn't explain. His heart wasn't racing. Instead, he felt the same steady calm he'd learned to rely on in the hardest parts of his life. He knew fear well enough to understand that this wasn't it. Something else was happening. He slowly stepped forward, not toward the crash, but toward the point where he could see more clearly. From the distance, the figure moved slowly, almost weakly, like she wasn't fully aware of her surroundings. She lifted one arm and placed it beside the glowing shell, as if using it for support. Her movements didn't look aggressive. They looked tired. She turned her head toward the town, but she didn't chase anyone. She didn't move closer. She simply looked around, scanning the environment like she was searching for something familiar. Then she touched the abandoned car near the crash site one that had been left there earlier by campers. As soon as her hand rested against it, the lights on the car flickered. The quiet man noticed this detail carefully. The car's battery wasn't strong, but the lights blinked like something was drawing energy from it. She wasn't attacking. She was surviving. He slowly exhaled. He had seen enough in his life to understand desperation when he saw it. Whatever she was, she didn't look like a conqueror or a fighter. She looked like someone who had landed far from her home and was struggling just to stay upright. Back in town, people gathered inside the diner, trying to talk over each other. They worried she might come closer. They wondered if they should call someone from outside the town: scientists, the military, anyone. Rumors filled the air faster than real information. One person said they saw her stalking the fields. Another said she drained power from power lines with her hands. None of it was confirmed, but fear didn't wait for facts. The quiet man finally walked back toward the diner. People rushed to him, asking what he'd seen. He didn't give dramatic descriptions. He didn't scare anyone. He simply told them she didn't look violent, but she looked like she needed something, maybe energy or support, and that she wasn't moving toward them. Nobody believed him. They said he was being reckless, too calm, too trusting. But he didn't argue. He never argued. He just listened to the panic and watched how fear changed people, how it made them exaggerate, forget reason, and imagine danger in every shadow. When night came, the desert became even quieter. The sky was filled with stars, and the air grew colder. The glowing shell continued to give off light. From his small house near the edge of town, the quiet man could see the sky glow faintly in the distance. He sat outside with a cup of warm tea, thinking about what might have brought her here. No creature, alien or human, traveled across space for no reason. He remembered how lost he once felt when he first arrived in this town, carrying memories he never shared with anyone. The emptiness in her eyes reminded him of something he understood too well: fear mixed with hope, and the feeling of landing somewhere you didn't choose. As the night deepened, he noticed something unusual. The lights in the town flickered for a moment. Not enough to cause alarm, but enough to show something was affecting the power. He didn't panic. Instead, he felt sure she must be searching for energy not to harm, but to heal. A soft wind blew through the desert grass, carrying the faintest echo of the glowing shell's hum. Most people couldn't hear it. Most wouldn't want to. But he listened carefully, letting the sound guide his thoughts. He wasn't planning anything. He wasn't preparing a mission. He simply knew that while others feared her, he felt something different, something that felt almost like responsibility. Not because he was stronger, not because he was a hero, but because sometimes life brings someone in front of you that everyone else runs from, and you become the one who stays. And deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of whatever story had just started in that desert. It was only the beginning. The town was terrified, the creature was wounded, and the night was growing colder. But somewhere inside him, a quiet certainty formed. He wouldn't run. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not from her. The quiet man woke up early the next morning, long before the sun rose. Sleep hadn't come easily. His mind kept going back to the glowing shell in the desert, and the tall figure who stepped out of it. Something about her presence stayed in his thoughts, like a puzzle he couldn't put down. Not a frightening puzzle, just something that felt too important to ignore. He stepped outside his small home. The air was cool and still, the kind of silence where even the wind seemed to be waiting. The sky was turning a pale shade of blue, giving the desert a soft, washed-out look. Far in the distance, he could still see the faint glow of the strange object. Most people in town were still asleep, or at least pretending to sleep, hoping that when they woke up, everything would return to normal. But the quiet man knew nothing was going back to normal. Not yet. He poured himself a bit of water, splashed some on his face, and thought about whether he should go closer to the crash site. He didn't want to startle her or make her think he was a threat, but he also felt that simply waiting and doing nothing wasn't right. When something unfamiliar arrives in your world, running away isn't the only choice. Sometimes, watching with a clear mind tells you more than fear ever will. He walked slowly through the empty street. The town felt different today. Every window blind was shut. Every curtain was drawn. Even the dogs that usually barked at shadows stayed silent, almost sensing the unease in the air. At the gas station, the lights were still off, and a notice had been taped on the door, closed until further notice. The words looked rushed, like someone wrote them in a hurry before running home. As he reached the edge of town, he paused for a moment. The open desert stretched in front of him like a giant, quiet sea. The sun had begun to rise, painting the sand in warm colors. He took a deep breath and continued walking. He kept his steps steady and light, not wanting to cause alarm. When he finally reached the area near the crash site, he stopped behind a small ridge. From there, he could see her, the tall alien woman, standing beside the glowing shell. She looked calmer in daylight, but also weaker. Her movements were slow, as if she was saving her energy for something important. She wasn't doing anything threatening. She wasn't moving toward the town. She wasn't breaking anything. She just stood there, touching the broken parts of her crashed pod with a slow, uncertain motion, like she was trying to decide what could be repaired and what was lost forever. Then something unexpected happened. She reached her hand toward a power pole nearby, and the wires made a faint buzzing sound. The quiet man watched carefully. She wasn't hurting the pole. Instead, the lines flickered for a moment, and he realized she was drawing energy from them, but just a little, not enough to cause damage. He understood then. She wasn't a creature looking to attack. She was a traveler who needed energy to survive. He stepped back, thinking about how he could explain this to the town. They wouldn't believe him unless they saw it with their own eyes, and none of them would dare come this close. Most people only trust what matches their fear, not what challenges it. When he returned to town, the sun was fully up, and people had gathered again in the diner, the same way they always did when something big happened. But this time, their faces were tight with worry. Some whispered, some looked at their phones for updates, even though no news had come from outside. A woman near the counter looked at the quiet man as soon as he walked in. "Did you go out there again?" she asked in a shaky voice. He nodded. "Are you trying to get yourself hurt?" He shook his head. "She's not coming toward the town," he said calmly. "She's staying near the crash. She's weak, not dangerous." People stared at him like he had said something unbelievable. A man near the window replied, "Weak or not, she's not supposed to be here. How do we know she won't change later?" Someone else added, "We should call for help. Government, scientists, anyone." The quiet man sat down and waited for the noise to settle. When they finally stopped talking over one another, he spoke again. "She needs energy to survive. Not people's energy, just electricity." She was using old wires, broken machines, not hurting anything. The room fell quiet for a moment, but not because they believed him. It was because they were processing the idea, unsure what to do with it. The town's oldest resident, a calm woman who rarely raised her voice, finally spoke. Even if she means no harm, what if others come looking for her? The quiet man didn't answer. Nobody knew whether she was alone or part of something bigger. But then something unexpected happened. A loud hum echoed through the town, making everyone jump. The lights flickered again, not enough to shut down, just enough to make people look up in fear. Someone shouted, "She's draining our power." But the quiet man knew that wasn't true. One small flicker wasn't enough to blame her for anything. He left the diner and walked outside. The sun was shining brightly now, but the town felt colder than usual. Fear had a way of chilling the air, even in warm places. As he walked, he thought about how difficult it would be to convince people that not everything unknown is dangerous. Later in the afternoon, a loud truck entered town. It was one of the few vehicles that traveled through the desert regularly. The driver parked, got out, and asked why people were acting so strange. When they explained everything, his eyes widened, but instead of running, he suggested something that surprised everyone. If she came from the sky, the driver said, maybe she isn't here to stay. Maybe she just needs help. People didn't like the idea. Helping something unfamiliar didn't sit well with them. But the driver's words stayed in their minds, even if they didn't admit it. As evening approached, the quiet man decided he had to go back out again. He didn't want to put himself in danger, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was alone out there in a world she didn't understand. He walked slowly, with purpose, stopping again near the ridge. This time, she wasn't standing. She was sitting beside the broken shell, her head bent slightly forward, like she was exhausted. The soft glow around her seemed weaker than earlier. He watched carefully, trying to understand her situation. For the first time since her arrival, she looked almost human. Not in appearance, but in the way she seemed lost, unsure, trying to figure out what to do. He took one slow step forward, then another. He wasn't planning to go all the way to her. Not yet, but he wanted to see if she noticed him. As soon as his foot pressed against the sand, she lifted her head. Her eyes locked onto him instantly, alert but not hostile. He froze. Not out of fear, but out of respect. She didn't stand. She didn't raise her hand. She simply looked at him the way someone looks at a stranger they're trying to understand. The wind blew softly between them, carrying bits of sand across the ground. He gently lifted his hand halfway, not waving, just showing he wasn't a threat. She tilted her head slightly, like she was studying his gesture. A faint light flickered around her fingers, but she didn't use it. They stayed like that for several long seconds, two beings from different worlds acknowledging each other with silence. Not fear. Then she lowered her head again, as if tiredness was pulling her down. The quiet man knew then that he had to do more. She was weaker today than yesterday. Whatever energy she had taken from broken machines wasn't enough. If she didn't find a safe way to recover, something worse might happen, not because she wanted to harm, but because she was fighting to survive. He walked back to town slowly, thinking deeply. When he entered the diner again, the people looked at him, waiting for an update, even if they pretended they didn't care. She's getting weaker, he said. She's not a threat, but she's running out of energy. If she collapses, something could go wrong. They didn't know how to respond. Some looked worried. Some looked frustrated. Some looked like they wanted to believe him but didn't know how. He added quietly, if we don't understand her now, we'll misunderstand everything she does later. The room went still. By the time night fell again, he had made up his mind. The town could keep worrying. People could keep fearing. But he knew what he needed to do. He had to go back to her closer than before. He had to learn what she wanted, how she survived, and what brought her here. Not because he wanted to be a hero, not because he wanted attention, but because sometimes the world puts you in front of someone everyone else runs from, and something deep inside you says, "Stay, Dot." And as he walked into the quiet desert night, the faint glow on the horizon seemed to pulse like a heartbeat calling him forward. The quiet man walked through the desert night with slow, steady steps. The air felt colder than usual, and the sand shifted quietly under his feet. The sky above him was filled with stars, more than he had noticed in a long time. Maybe it was because he had spent the last 2 days looking outward instead of upward, trying to understand something that had no name, no history, and no explanation. The faint glow from the crash site pulsed like a distant heartbeat. Every time he looked up, it seemed to call him, quietly but clearly. He knew he was taking a risk walking out there alone, but the risk felt less frightening than the idea of leaving her out there without help. He reached the ridge again. This time, he didn't stop at the top. He stood there for a moment, watching her motionless form. She was still sitting beside the glowing shell, her shoulders slightly curved forward. She looked smaller than before, not because she had physically changed, but because her energy was fading. He took a breath and walked slowly toward her. The sand crunched under his boots, the sound soft and careful. When he came close enough, she lifted her head. Her eyes glowed faintly, reacting to his presence, but the glow wasn't strong enough to scare him. It was more like a tired spark, something barely holding on. He felt his heartbeat slow as their eyes met. There was no fear between them, only curiosity, uncertainty, and something else he couldn't name. He paused a few feet away from her, close enough to see the cracks on her smooth, strange clothing and the faint flicker of light around her hands. She didn't move away. She didn't raise her arms or make any threatening gestures. She simply watched him, waiting to see what he would do. He gently lowered himself to the ground, sitting far enough to show respect, but close enough to show he wasn't running away. The night was quiet around them. No town sounds, no cars, no voices. Just the desert wind and the low hum coming from the broken shell. For a moment, they stayed silent, both unsure how to begin something that didn't have a clear beginning. He lifted one hand slightly, placing it on his chest, trying to show something simple. "I am not here to hurt you." Her eyes narrowed a little, like she was trying to understand his meaning. She placed her hand on her own chest, not in the same way he did, but close enough that he could see she understood a part of what he was trying to say. Then she touched the ground lightly with her fingertips, as if grounding herself. Her voice came unexpectedly. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't sharp. It was soft, like a whisper carried through a speaker. Not quite human, but not frightening either. He didn't understand the words. She was speaking in a language he had never heard before. The sound was smooth, flowing like water. He shook his head gently, showing he couldn't understand. She looked down for a moment, then touched the cracked part of her pod. Light traveled across the broken surface, forming shapes in the air, small glowing symbols. They shifted slowly, trying to find a pattern he might recognize. He watched carefully, trying to make sense of the symbols. They changed again, forming something closer to drawing's simple shapes. A circle, a star, a line across a dark shape that looked like space. A point moving between them. She was trying to tell him a story. He leaned forward slightly, studying the shapes. The point moved from the circle to the star, then stumbled, losing its path, falling. The lights flickered around her hand. She tapped the cracked surface again, and the same falling shape appeared. He understood. She was traveling. Something went wrong. She crashed here. He nodded slowly, letting her know he was following. She looked up, and for a moment, He thought he saw relief in her eyes. She tried drawing more symbols. He watched as she formed a shape that looked like a large tear, followed by small sparks around it. She pressed her palm gently against her chest, as if to show pain. The symbols faded. He understood again. She was injured. He spoke softly, not sure if she could understand, but his tone was slow and calm. "You're hurt," he said. "You need energy to stay alive." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the way he spoke. Tone mattered more than language sometimes. He pointed toward the broken machine parts scattered around the crash site. The lights flickered faintly when he pointed at them, like she was reacting to the idea. She lifted her hand toward an old rusted engine, and a small stream of light connected to it for a second, then faded. She was too weak. He looked back toward the town. He thought about generators, batteries, even small power banks people kept in their drawers. He wondered if the town's electricity could support her without causing fear. But he knew bringing her closer to the town would make things worse. People were already on edge. If they saw her up close, panic would turn into something more dangerous. She needed a safe way to recover here, far from frightened eyes. He rubbed his hands together slowly, thinking. She watched him, almost studying his thought process the same way he was studying hers. He pointed toward the desert, drawing a small line in the sand. Then he pointed back to her. He was trying to say that he could bring something from the town to her. She looked at his drawing, then back at him. Her head tilted slightly, a sign she was beginning to understand. He stood up slowly, brushing the sand off his clothes. She tensed slightly, not in fear but in alertness. He raised his hands gently to show calm, then pointed back toward the town. Then he pointed at himself, then at her. He was saying, as simply as possible, "I will come back." Her eyes followed his gestures. She blinked slowly, the faint glow soft and tired. She didn't stop him. She let him walk away. As he moved through the dark desert, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. He wasn't rushing wildly or acting without thought. He was simply doing what felt right, even if nobody else would understand. When he returned to town, the streets were quiet. A few houses had lights on, flickering cautiously as people stayed awake out of fear. He walked past them without drawing attention. He didn't want to cause questions. He needed time to think before explaining anything to anyone else. He reached his home and opened a storage box where he kept a few old devices, camping lamps, small batteries, a portable generator he hadn't used in years. He gathered what he could carry, testing each item quietly. Some worked. Some didn't, but he collected enough to at least help her for one night. When he returned to the desert for the second time that night, the air felt cooler, and the glow from the crash site had grown weaker. Like her energy was fading fast. He made it to the ridge and walked down carefully with the supplies. She lifted her head when she saw him coming, her eyes glowing a little brighter, like she recognized him. He placed the small generator on the sand and turned it on gently. The soft hum filled the air. She flinched at the sound at first, confused, unsure what to expect. But when he pointed toward the machine and touched the humming surface, she slowly extended her hand. A soft thread of light reached out from her fingertips and touched the generator. The lights on the machine flickered, but not with danger, more like communication. Then she absorbed a bit of its energy, not violently, not in a harmful way, just enough to brighten the glow around her shoulders. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, he saw something that almost looked like gratitude. She made a soft sound, something short, gentle, almost like a quiet breath. He didn't understand the words she spoke, but he understood the meaning behind them. She wasn't alone anymore. For the next hour, she absorbed small amounts of energy, not rushing, not draining too much. He sat nearby, watching the glow around her grow a little stronger as she recovered. The desert remained quiet, as if watching their fragile connection unfold. When she finally stopped absorbing energy, she looked at him in a way that felt almost familiar. Not human, but understanding. She placed her hand over her heart again and lowered her head slightly. He mirrored the gesture without saying a word. Two beings from different worlds, trying their best to understand each other, not through language, not through force, but through quiet patience. The night stretched around them peacefully, and as he walked back toward town before dawn, he felt something settle firmly in his chest, the realization that their worlds had already collided, and nothing would ever be the same again. When the first light of early morning touched the broken towers of the abandoned city, the air felt strangely still. The human warrior stood near the ruins of the old bridge, staring at the horizon where the sky shifted from deep blue to faint orange. After everything that had happened, the battles, the fear, the choices he never thought he would make, he didn't know what waited ahead. But he knew this was not the end. Not for him. Not for the alien queen who had changed everything. She stood a few steps behind him, leaning lightly on a stone pillar. Her wounds had healed enough for her to walk without help, though she still moved slowly. Her dark, metallic eyes watched the sky with the same silence he held. It was the kind of silence that came only after surviving something impossible. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The night they had escaped from the underground facility had changed the air between them. Before that, she had been a threat powerful, unpredictable, feared by everyone. But he had seen her bleed. He had heard her voice shake when she talked about the experiments done on her people. He had seen her protect him, even when she had no strength left. And she had seen something in him too. Someone who didn't run away, even when everyone else had. But the world outside didn't know any of this. To the rest of the survivors, she was still the queen they feared. And he knew the moment they stepped out of the shadows, rumors would spread, questions would rise, and someone would come after them. Not just because she was alien, but because people were afraid of anything they didn't understand. He finally exhaled and turned toward her. "We can't stay here," he said quietly. "They'll find us." She nodded, her expression calm but heavy. Her voice was soft when she replied, almost unsure. "Where do we go?" He didn't know. He wished he did. But he walked closer to her and simply said, "Somewhere they won't expect." The small plan they had built during the night was simple. Move before anyone noticed. Stay away from the roads. Find a place where healing and recovery were possible. It was not much, but it was enough to keep them alive for now. They began walking through the cracked streets, passing collapsed buildings, rusted cars, and empty shelters. He could feel her presence behind him, not threatening, but strangely comforting. She didn't walk like a queen anymore. She walked like someone who had lost her world and didn't know how to build a new one. After an hour, they reached an old path leading toward the forest outside the city. The trees were tall, their branches thick enough to block most of the sky. As they stepped under the shade, the air cooled, carrying the scent of earth and leaves. The warrior glanced back at her to see if she was all right. She looked around slowly, studying the forest like it was a place from a dream. "It's quiet," she whispered. "That's why we're here," he replied. They stopped at a small clearing near a stream. The water was clear, moving softly over smooth rocks. He knelt and filled a metal can with water while she sat on a fallen log, watching the way the sunlight danced on the surface. He handed her the water, and she accepted it with both hands. She took a careful sip, as though she still wasn't used to human things. After a moment, she looked at him and said, "You saved me last night." "You saved me too," he answered, her eyes lowered. "I could not leave you there." He didn't ask why. There were questions he wasn't ready to ask yet, and answers she wasn't ready to give. So instead, they stayed in the quiet for a while, letting the forest settle around them. Later that afternoon, thunder rolled in the distance. Dark clouds gathered, and soon rain began falling in thin, cold sheets. They moved beneath a large, overhanging rock that formed a natural shelter. The rain made the forest smell even fresher, and the sound of water hitting leaves became a soothing rhythm. She sat close to him, her shoulders slightly shaking from the cold. Without thinking, he removed his outer jacket and placed it around her. She looked surprised. "You need it," she said. "I'm fine," he replied. She hesitated, then nodded and wrapped the fabric around herself. Her eyes met his for a moment, and something quiet passed between them, something warm enough to settle the cold. The rain lasted for hours. As night approached, the forest darkened completely, and the only light came from the small fire the warrior had built. The flames reflected in her eyes, making them glow softly. She finally spoke, her voice low. "When I was taken from my people, I was told humans hated us. I was told you feared us, that you wished to destroy us." He stared into the fire, thinking about how many things humans feared simply because they didn't understand them. "Not everyone is like that," he said softly. "Some just don't know how to trust what feels different." "I am different," she said quietly, almost like a confession. He looked at her then and answered, "You are. But that's not a bad thing." Her expression changed a small, fragile shift that showed she wasn't used to hearing words like that. Silence settled again. But this time it was gentle, comforting. The next morning, after the rain stopped, they continued deeper into the forest. The path grew steeper until they reached a hill overlooking a wide valley. The sky was clear again, the light bright and warm. As they stood on the hill, the warrior noticed movement far below. A group of people, soldiers. He pulled her behind a tree, lowering his voice. "They're searching." She stiffened, her breathing quickening. "For me?" "For both of us," he said. "We need to move." But there was no safe direction. The valley below was crawling with drones and vehicles. Staying in the forest was the only option, but even that would not hide them forever. She placed a hand on the tree trunk, closing her eyes as though listening to something far away. When she opened them again, she said, "I can sense their energy. They're not close enough to catch us yet." He nodded, trusting her instincts. "Then we keep going." They walked until evening, when exhaustion finally pulled them to a stop. They found a quiet cave hidden behind thick vines. Inside, the air was cool, and the stone walls gave them a small sense of protection. He lit another small fire, and the soft glow filled the space. As she sat beside him, she asked suddenly, "Why didn't you leave when the others ran? You could have escaped easily." He didn't answer right away. He searched his own memories. Those first moments when the queen had appeared, the fear in everyone's eyes, the chaos. He remembered the moment she staggered, wounded, and how something inside him refused to walk away. "I saw something in your eyes," he said finally. "Something that didn't match the stories people told about you. I couldn't explain it, but I trusted it." Her gaze softened in a way he hadn't seen before. A quiet emotion, almost gratitude, settled over her features. "You changed my fate," she said. "Maybe we changed each other?" he replied. The fire crackled gently between them. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, making the night feel alive but peaceful. As the hours passed, she leaned back against the cave wall, tired but calm. He watched the shadows move along her face and felt a strange shift inside himself. Something gentle, something protective, something he didn't know how to name. He finally lay down beside the fire, and she lay a short distance away. The last thing he heard before sleep pulled him under was her voice. soft enough to almost blend with the wind. You are the first human who ever saw me as more than a threat. And before he could respond, sleep took him. Morning came again, quiet and golden. They woke at the same time, both sensing something new in the air. The danger outside still existed, but something else existed too, a bond formed through survival, trust, and moments shared in silence. He stood and helped her out of the cave. The world before them was still broken, still uncertain, but no longer as frightening as before. They weren't running now. They were moving forward. Together. And whatever waited in the unknown world ahead, they would face it side by side, one brave human warrior and the alien queen who had once been feared by all, but had finally found someone who stayed when everyone else fled. Their story wasn't ending here. It was only beginning.